I need you to marry me until the summit ends. At 9:11 on a Tuesday night, I stood inside Ethan Cole's corner office wondering whether exhaustion had finally broken the most controlled man in Manhattan. Ethan was 38, an alpha CEO who could silence a boardroom by closing a folder. I was Jamie Walker, 29, an Omega executive communications manager who had spent 4 years making sure his impossible schedule did not destroy everyone around him. That is not how marriage works, I said. Technically, I need you to pretend to be my fiancé for 6 weeks. Ethan placed a slim folder on his desk. Beside it sat a small velvet ring box. I stared at both objects. Somehow, that is worse. His mouth almost became a smile. Almost. Then he explained. His mother, Victoria Cole, and several influential investors had spent months encouraging a strategic engagement between Ethan and Madeline Price, the daughter of a major investor. Madeline apparently wanted no part of it either, but rumors were becoming headlines, and the upcoming investor summit would turn speculation into pressure. Ethan wanted the matter ended before anyone else decided his personal life was a corporate asset. So your solution is me? I asked. A fake engagement gives them a clear answer. You have thousands of employees. I am aware. Hundreds of people in this building would volunteer. That is exactly why I did not ask them. That stopped me. Ethan moved the folder toward me but did not open the ring box. 6 weeks. Separate homes. No financial dependency. Your position, salary, evaluations, and advancement remain protected whether you accept, refuse, or end the arrangement early. You get independent legal counsel at company expense. I studied him. You planned this. I prepare for difficult conversations. You prepared paperwork for asking your Omega employee to become your fake fiancé. When you say it that way, my judgment sounds questionable. I laughed despite myself, which only made the situation stranger. Then I noticed something Ethan almost never showed. He was nervous. Not dramatically. Just one thumb pressed against the edge of his desk, holding perfectly still. Looked at the unopened ring box again. Why me, Ethan? For several seconds, the city lights behind him seemed brighter than the office. Then he met my eyes. Because you are the only person here who has never tried to become important to me. My heartbeat stumbled. Ethan continued quietly. And somehow, Jamie, you became important anyway. For the next 48 hours, I tried to convince myself that Ethan's last sentence had not changed anything. Failed. By Thursday afternoon, I was sitting in a conference room with Scott Reynolds, Ethan's general counsel, and Daniel Mercer, the independent attorney I had chosen to represent me. Ethan was not allowed in the room while we reviewed the agreement, which was my first indication that he had taken my freedom to refuse seriously. Daniel reduced the arrangement to 6 rules I could actually live with. It would last exactly 6 weeks. Ethan and I would keep separate homes. I would receive no bonus, promotion, gift, or financial advantage for participating. My employment would remain protected whether I accepted, refused, or ended the arrangement early. Neither of us could interfere with the other's private friendships or social life. Any public physical affection required mutual consent. The final rule was simple. When the investor summit ended, so did the agreement. I changed 2 sentences, added 1 protection Daniel recommended, and signed only after he told me he was satisfied. Ethan signed 15 minutes later without negotiating a single change. Then he opened the velvet box. Inside was a simple platinum band. You already knew my ring size? I asked. Ethan looked almost offended. I manage a company with 11,000 employees. I can solve basic logistical problems. That answer somehow makes this more alarming. His expression softened. You do not have to wear it until our first public appearance. I picked up the ring myself and slid it onto my finger. Ethan watched for 1 second too long before looking back at the paperwork. That should have been the strangest moment of the day. It was not. Friday evening, we stayed late to rehearse the fictional history of our relationship. According to Ethan's carefully prepared notes, our first date had supposedly been at an Italian restaurant in Soho. Absolutely not, I said. Why? You hated that restaurant. Ethan stared at me. I went there once. 2 years ago. You complained about the risotto for an entire elevator ride. You remember that? Unfortunately. He leaned back, studying me with unexpected amusement. Fine. Where would I have taken you? Somewhere quiet. You hate restaurants where you cannot hear the person across the table. His smile disappeared into something gentler. You know me surprisingly well. I looked down at the index cards. Occupational hazard. Then Ethan picked up my imaginary first date profile. You would order coffee afterward. Oat milk, cinnamon, no sugar. I looked up. How do you know that? You bring one into Monday meetings. You notice my coffee? I notice more than coffee. The room suddenly felt too quiet. Ethan continued, almost cautiously. You avoid crowded elevators. You call your mother every Sunday morning. You left the holiday party early last year because Tyler from accounting was having a panic attack and you drove him home. I had never told Ethan that. There had been no cameras, no investors, and no reason for him to remember. I glanced at the platinum ring on my hand, then at the stack of cards containing facts we were supposed to memorize about a relationship that had never happened. The problem was becoming obvious. We did not need to invent enough details to look convincing. We already knew too many real ones. By Saturday evening, I had repeated our fictional first date story so many times that I could have recited it in my sleep. But none of that preparation helped when Ethan offered me his hand outside the Langford Foundation gala. Cameras flashed beyond the hotel entrance, and dozens of donors filled the ballroom inside. Ethan did not touch me. He simply held out his hand and waited. That small pause mattered more than it should have. I placed my hand in his. Ready? He asked. You are the one who invented this. That was not an answer. I looked at him and smiled. Yes, Ethan. I am ready. We entered together. For the first 20 minutes, everything went exactly according to plan. We smiled for photographs, greeted investors, and answered harmless questions about how long we had supposedly been together. Ethan remembered every rehearsed detail. I remembered every rule. Then a financial reporter named Rebecca Lane stepped forward and asked the one question we had prepared for repeatedly. Mr. Cole, when did you realize Jamie was the person you wanted beside you? Our approved answer was simple. Shared values, mutual respect, similar goals. I waited for Ethan to deliver it. He looked at me instead. When I realized he was the only person in my company who would tell me the truth even when the truth was inconvenient. My smile almost disappeared. That was not the script. Ethan continued. Jamie remembers that businesses are made of people before they are made of numbers. He notices when someone is struggling. He asks questions other people are afraid to ask me. And somehow he makes me listen. Rebecca smiled. That sounds very specific. It is. Ethan never looked away from me. The reporter thanked us and moved on. But I stayed frozen for half a second before following Ethan toward the quieter side of the ballroom. Shared values, I whispered. That was the answer. It sounded like an annual report. You wrote it. That does not make it better. I tried not to laugh and failed. Ethan smiled, and suddenly we were not performing anymore. For the rest of the evening, everything became strangely easy. I reminded him of an investor's spouse's name. He rescued me from a conversation about golf that had lasted approximately 12 years. When someone asked about wedding dates, Ethan calmly said we were enjoying the present instead of rushing the future. Near midnight, we escaped the ballroom and waited in the quiet hotel lobby for our town car. Only then did I notice something. Ethan was still holding my hand. There were no photographers nearby, no investors, no reason to continue. I lifted our joined hands slightly. Ethan. His eyes followed mine downward. He released me immediately. Sorry. I should have let the moment disappear. Instead, I said, you forgot there was nobody watching. Something changed in his expression. Apparently, the car arrived outside, but neither of us moved right away. I looked down at the platinum ring catching the lobby light and remembered every rule we had written to keep 6 weeks simple. The problem was no longer whether we could convince everyone else that our relationship was real. The problem was that, For one quiet moment after the audience disappeared, Ethan had forgotten it was supposed to be fake. For the next 2 weeks, the most dangerous moments were not the ones with cameras. They were the quiet ones nobody had planned. One Wednesday night, I walked into Ethan's office at almost 9 and found him surrounded by staffing reports, budget projections, and an untouched lunch container. "When did you last eat?" I asked. "I had coffee." "Coffee is not food." That sounds unnecessarily judgmental. I disappeared downstairs and returned with a turkey sandwich. Ethan stared at it, then at me. "This is not in our agreement. Neither is letting my chief executive officer survive on caffeine." He smiled and actually ate. 3 nights later, we were rehearsing questions for dinner with his mother when exhaustion caught me. I sat on Ethan's sofa and closed my eyes for what I intended to be 30 seconds. When I woke, the office was dark except for 2 lamps, and the clock read 10:47. A gray blanket covered me. Ethan was working from an armchair several feet away. "You should have woken me. You needed sleep. You could have gone home." Ethan looked up from his laptop. "I did not want you waking up alone in an empty office. There was no audience to impress." That thought followed me into Monday afternoon, when Tyler from accounting quietly admitted he was worried about an upcoming donor reception because he could not afford a new jacket. I gave him the address of a consignment store I trusted and arranged to cover the difference without making it feel like charity. After Tyler left the conference room, I discovered Ethan standing near the doorway. "How long have you been there?" "Long enough." I sighed. "Please do not turn this into an executive leadership lesson." "I was not going to." He stepped inside. "I was going to say that you notice people everyone else walks past." The sincerity in his voice made it impossible to joke. "It was just a jacket." "No, Jamie. It was dignity. You understood the difference." I looked away because somehow that felt more intimate than holding his hand before 100 photographers. By the 3rd week, our Friday dinners had stopped pretending to be rehearsals. We still discussed schedules, but we also argued about movies, compared terrible childhood haircuts, and discovered Ethan secretly loved old mystery novels. He learned that I called my mother every Sunday because my father had died years earlier and I never wanted her to feel forgotten. None of those details belonged in a press briefing. None helped investors believe our engagement. One evening, as we left the office, Ethan reached toward my hand, then stopped before touching me. "May I?" he asked. I looked at the empty hallway. "There is nobody here." "I know." That answer stayed between us. I placed my hand in his anyway. For the first time, neither of us could pretend we were practicing. By the 4th week, I had learned that pretending to be engaged to Ethan was easier than pretending I did not care about him. The problem became obvious at a charity planning meeting in Midtown. I was reviewing community center designs when Aaron Blake, an alpha architect working on the project, joined me beside a display table. Aaron was funny, easygoing, and refreshingly uninterested in corporate politics. After 20 minutes of discussing the project, he handed me his business card. "Would you like to get coffee Saturday?" he asked. I was about to answer when Ethan appeared beside us. "Jamie has donor dinner preparations Saturday." I turned slowly. "Do I?" Ethan's expression remained perfectly professional. "Yes." Aaron glanced between us, clearly sensing something I had not yet decided whether to enjoy or challenge. "Another time then," he said before leaving. I waited until he disappeared around the corner. "The donor dinner is Friday." Ethan adjusted his cuff. "The schedule changed." "No, it did not. I manage your schedule." He had no answer. I followed him into a quieter hallway. "Rule 4. Ethan stopped. "I remember the agreement." "Then you remember that neither of us interferes with the other's private social life. You are publicly engaged to me. Being photographed having coffee with another alpha could create unnecessary questions." "That sounds reasonable." Ethan relaxed slightly. "Good. Except you are jealous." His expression immediately closed. "This is about public optics." "Then tell me to go." "What?" "Tell me I should have coffee with Aaron." Silence. I waited. Ethan looked toward the windows, then back at me. Jamie, that is not an answer. For perhaps the first time since I had known him, Ethan Cole had no business language left to hide behind. We barely spoke during the ride back to the office. I was frustrated, but what bothered me most was that part of me had wanted him to be jealous. That realization was more uncomfortable than his behavior. An hour later, as I waited for the elevator, Ethan approached me. I was wrong. I looked at him. That was fast. Do not make me regret developing self-awareness. I almost smiled, but he remained serious. I used work as an excuse for something personal. You agreed to boundaries and I crossed one. I am sorry. The elevator arrived, but I did not enter. Were you jealous? Ethan could have avoided the question. Instead, he met my eyes. Yes. One word. Completely unprotected. I looked down at the platinum ring. Fake fiancés are not supposed to care who the other person gets coffee with. I know. So what exactly are we doing? Ethan was quiet for several seconds. I think that is the problem. What problem? His voice softened. This stopped feeling entirely fake to me before I realized it was happening. The elevator doors began closing, then opened again because neither of us had moved. Ethan stayed several feet away, giving me space even after admitting the one thing that changed everything. I should have stepped inside. Instead, I asked, "And what happens now?" Ethan looked at me with an honesty that frightened me more than any contract ever could. Nothing you do not choose. Saturday evening, Ethan and I drove nearly 90 miles north of Manhattan to his mother's country home, and for the first hour I almost believed the hardest part would be remembering which version of our relationship we had told his family. I was wrong. Victoria Cole was elegant, observant, and capable of turning a polite question into an examination without changing her tone. Dinner began harmlessly enough. She asked about my mother, my education, and my work at Cole Meridian Group. Then she set down her wineglass and said, "For years at the company, Jamie, your career seems to have accelerated rather quickly." I understood immediately. I received my first promotion before Ethan and I became personally involved. I said, "And the second?" After I led 2 investor campaigns and helped rebuild our executive communications process. Victoria smiled politely. Of course, I only imagine being close to the chief executive officer creates opportunities. Ethan shifted beside me, but I answered before he could speak. It can create assumptions. That is why my performance reviews, compensation decisions, and advancement process are independently documented. Victoria looked mildly surprised. You came prepared. I have spent 4 years being prepared. I could handle her. Ethan knew that. Still, when Victoria suggested that people might always wonder how much of my success belonged to her son, Ethan quietly placed his fork down. None of it belongs to me. The table became silent. His voice remained calm. Jamie built his career before this relationship existed. He has never asked me for money, influence, a title, or special treatment. If anything, he argues with me more often than anyone I employ. I glanced at him. That last part is unfortunately true. Ethan almost smiled, but his attention stayed on his mother. You can question my decisions. You do not get to reduce Jamie's work to one of them. I did not need Ethan to rescue me, and somehow that made his choice to speak matter more. Under the edge of the table, I lightly touched his sleeve, telling him without words that I was all right. Later, I found him alone on the covered back porch overlooking the dark lawn. I could have handled that, I said. I know. Then why did you step in? Ethan looked toward me. Because being capable of defending yourself does not mean you should always have to. I leaned against the porch railing. Was that part of the performance? No. His answer came immediately. The agreement is temporary. My respect for you is not. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I decided he had earned one truth in return. I did not have coffee with Aaron. Ethan's expression changed so quickly that I laughed. You look relieved. I am attempting not to. You are failing. Apparently I have several new weaknesses. I looked down at the platinum ring. We have a little over 3 weeks left. Ethan's faint smile disappeared. The deadline had once sounded like protection. Standing beside him in the quiet night, it sounded like something else entirely. For the first time, I realized I was no longer counting the days until I could leave. I was counting how few remained. 1 week before the agreement ended, I discovered that deleting 42 days from a calendar was much harder than adding them had been. Monday morning, I opened our shared schedule and removed Thursday dinner, Wednesday rehearsal, the final family appearance, and every reminder that would become meaningless after the investor summit. Each empty space felt strangely personal. At 10, I carried the summit schedule into Ethan's office and found him staring at the same calendar. "You deleted Thursday dinner," he said. "It was never required." "I know." He said nothing else, but his disappointment followed me across the room. I set the schedule on his desk. "After Friday, everything goes back to normal." "Does it?" I tried to smile. "I manage your impossible schedule. You forget lunch." I complain. "You pretend not to hear me." Usually that would have earned a dry response. Ethan only looked at me. "Is that what you want?" The question caught me unprepared. I turned the platinum ring around my finger. "I do not know what normal means anymore." "Neither do I. Do you regret asking me?" "No." His answer was immediate. "I regret giving this an expiration date." 2 days later, that sentence still occupied my thoughts when Ethan found me near the executive elevators after work. "Jamie, there is something I need to explain." "That sounds ominous." "I am still your chief executive officer. You entered this arrangement because I asked you. Until it ends, anything I say about how I feel could create pressure, even if I never intend it." Frustration rose before I could hide it. "You keep talking about feelings without actually telling me what they are." Ethan's expression softened. "Because saying them while this agreement still exists could make you feel responsible for answering. Maybe I am tired of waiting for the contract to decide what we are allowed to say." He went silent. I looked toward the elevator display. "I wish we had never chosen an expiration date." "So do I." "Then change it." Ethan shook his head. "Not while I have more power in this situation than you do." The elevator doors opened behind me. I stayed where I was. Ethan continued, "If this means what I think it means, then the first thing I owe you is freedom from every obligation connecting you to me." "And if I walk away?" I asked. Something vulnerable crossed his face, but he did not move closer. "Then I let you." That answer hurt more than I expected. "You would really do that?" "I would hate it," he said quietly. "But yes." The elevator waited. I stepped inside and turned toward him. Ethan remained in the hallway, hands at his sides, making no attempt to stop the doors. For 6 weeks, I had believed the safest moment would be when the agreement finally released me. As the doors began closing between us, I understood the truth. Ethan was preparing to give me exactly what I had demanded from the beginning. A completely free choice, and I was terrified that freedom might mean losing him. Friday morning arrived with none of the relief I had expected. At 7:08, I stepped onto the executive floor and immediately knew something was wrong. Communication staff were moving between conference rooms. Scott Reynolds had taken over the boardroom with the legal team, and Ethan stood near the windows reading something on a tablet. He saw me and came directly over. A draft of the agreement was sent to a financial newsroom at 5:40 this morning. I looked at the platinum ring on my hand. "How much do they have?" "Enough." The investor summit began in less than 3 hours. Inside the emergency meeting, advisors offered carefully constructed responses. One option described the document as private planning material. Another avoided confirming anything. Then someone suggested emphasizing that I had received no direct payment, language that technically protected the company while leaving enough ambiguity for people to question my career. Ethan closed the folder. "No." I looked at him. "Choose whatever protects Cole Meridian." "What protects you?" The room became quiet. "Ethan, I can handle questions. You should not have to defend 4 years of work because of something I asked you to do." At 10:30, Ethan walked onto the summit stage. I remained near the back of the auditorium as he answered questions about quarterly performance, expansion plans, and investor confidence. Then Rebecca Lane stood. "Mr. Cole, is the leaked engagement agreement authentic?" Ethan looked down at the approved statement in front of him. Then he moved it aside. "Yes." The room changed instantly. The arrangement was my idea. Jamie Walker did not request compensation, advancement, influence, or special treatment. His employment protections were included so he could refuse me or leave the arrangement without professional consequences. Rebecca waited before asking the question I knew was coming. "Then is your relationship entirely fabricated?" Ethan was silent for 1 second. His eyes moved across the auditorium until they found mine. "The arrangement was planned," he said. "What happened afterward was not. I forgot how to breathe. My feelings for Jamie are real. His feelings belong to him, and he owes me no answer." Cameras turned toward me, but Ethan continued before anyone could approach. "The agreement expires at midnight. Jamie's position, salary, evaluations, and future at Cole Meridian will remain unchanged regardless of what he chooses afterward." Hours later, I found him alone in a corridor behind the auditorium. "You could have protected yourself," I said, "not by letting people believe you traded your career for proximity to me. What you said about your feelings was true." No hesitation. I looked at my ring. "Then what happens now?" Ethan checked his watch. "It is 7:15. The agreement exists for another 4 hours and 45 minutes. He deliberately stepped back. "Until midnight, I am not asking you for anything." Suddenly I understood. Ethan had confessed in front of hundreds of people, but he still refused to ask me to stay while even one line of the contract remained. For the first time since this began, midnight was not simply an ending. It was the moment when whatever happened next would finally belong entirely to us. At 12:15 in the morning, I found Ethan alone on the rooftop terrace of the hotel where the summit had ended hours earlier. Manhattan stretched below us in thousands of lights, but for once there were no reporters, investors, lawyers, or family members waiting for either of us to perform. Ethan turned when he heard the door close. His expression gave nothing away until I lifted my wrist and checked the time. 15 minutes late, I said. "The agreement is over." "Yes." I looked down at the platinum ring I had worn for 42 days. Removing it should have felt simple. Instead, my fingers hesitated before I finally slipped it free and held it toward him. Ethan accepted it carefully without touching my hand. He opened the original velvet box, placed the ring inside, and closed it. "You are completely free, Jamie." The words landed harder than I expected. Ethan continued before I could answer. "Your position remains yours. Your salary, evaluations, responsibilities, and advancement will not change because of anything that happened between us. If working directly with me becomes uncomfortable, Scott can arrange a transfer without affecting your career." I studied him. "You planned for me to leave. I planned for you to have the option." I glanced toward the terrace door. "What if I walk through that door right now?" Pain crossed his face, quiet but unmistakable. "Then I let you go. No argument? No impossible CEO solution?" A faint smile appeared. "Not this time." I took one step toward the door. Ethan remained exactly where he was. That was when everything became clear. For 6 weeks, he had been careful about every boundary. He had apologized when jealousy crossed one. He had defended my career when the contract leaked. Now, when there was finally nothing forcing me to stay, he was refusing to create a new reason. I stopped. "Ethan." He looked at me. "I spent 42 days wondering what part of this was real." I turned back toward him. "Now there is no contract left to blame." His breath caught. I walked toward him until only a comfortable distance remained between us. Ethan reached into his coat and removed a second velvet box. "I bought this 3 days ago," he said. "I was not going to show you unless you came here after midnight." Inside was a simple silver-toned ring, different from the one I had returned. "Buying it was my choice," Ethan said. "Wearing it has to be yours." He met my eyes. Jamie Walker, will you be my fiancé when there is no agreement keeping you here? I smiled and extended my left hand. Ask me the question you actually want to ask. For the first time that night, Ethan smiled too. Will you marry me? Yes. He placed the ring on my finger only after I kept my hand extended. Then I reached for his hand first. Ethan closed his fingers around mine. We stood together beneath the midnight sky, looking across Manhattan. No cameras were watching. No contract required us to remain. There was no audience left to convince. And this time, when Ethan held my hand, neither of us had any reason to let go.